Let me briefly introduce myself. I am Alexandre Markovic, currently a student at Gustav Eiffel University in master's degree in economic intelligence, influence, lobbying, and social media. Today, I will represent my work on my article, which deal with the third country diplomatic organization and discourses in the time of war. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in 2020 between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia and Azerbaijan are two countries in the Caucasus bordering on the west of the Caspian Sea, south of the Russian and Georgia, east of Turkey and north of Iraq. Nagorno-Karabakh is an Armenian region located in Azerbaijan, which can be seen in red on the map. The context of the conflict is based on several key and historical elements. This conflict is mainly based on the problem of border demarcation following the fragmentation of the URSS. We can see the same problem in Ukraine with the question of Crimea, but also in ex-Yugoslavia, which gave other armed conflict. The second important element of this conflict is also the question of the Armenian genocide by the Turk and Azeri forces, which create an increased tension between the population of these two countries and between
Desculpa.
the leaders of these two countries. In 2020, we lead the second armed phases in the conflict, but the first phases in 1921, at the time of the genocide, has required the intervention of the Soviet Union to stop. Most precisely, for Soviet Union, it was be a chance to enlarge its territory. The second armed phases begin with the breaking of the Minsk Group agreement by Azerbaijan. The Minsk Group is one of the ones that deal with peace issue in the Caucasus and the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. So we are following three main actors in the diplomatic action and communication. France, United States, Russia are mainly those who have made call for the return of peace in this region. The questioning is as follows: what is the interest of all third states diplomatically engaged in this conflict in the call of peace in Nagorno-Karabakh? Why did France and French diplomatic organizations supported by the United European Union make calls for peace in Nagorno-Karabakh? First of all, France is a member of a Minsk group which deal with Nagorno-Karabakh issue. France must defend the principle of the Minsk group. This is the first diplomatic reason for France, and the voice of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the President Emmanuel Macron communicate quickly and to ask for an immediate stop of the armed conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. The second reason for France to call peace is to position itself in opposition to Turkey, which is armoring and supplying Azerbaijan with mercenaries. At the time of the conflict, France and Turkey, through their respective presidents, opposed each other through the media following the assassination of Samuel Paty, an history and geography teacher, for having shown caricature of the Prophet of Islam, Mahomet. The third reason for France to intervene in Nagorno-Karabakh and to take call for peace is the weight of Armenian diaspora in France, which launched numerous calls to France to take part to stop the conflict and to support the independence of Nagorno-Karabakh. This call and demonstration was be encouraged and supported by the Armenian government, by the Armenian media in France. France has failed in this calling of peace and imposing calling of peace for 4 reasons. First reason, French position is not neutral enough. Second reason, France used the conflict to put itself in opposition to Turkey following a pre-existing diplomatic tension between the two nations. In third reason, inability to take the ear by the local leaders of two nations in armed conflicts. Last reason is the support from the European Union too weak in the peace processes launched by the France in Caucasus. Why United States calling for peace in this conflict? There are 4 main reasons that mean why United States call peace in this conflict. The first one is to find peace in this region for fear that other conflict located in the south and mainly fighting against Daesh in Iraq and Syria could spear to this region. The second point, it's an economic point for United States for this region, which make a link between Asia, Europe, and Middle East. The third point is also an American collective imagination. They are a role of pacemaker, and they are a strategic action based on the good all and interest of the nation. It's also a question for the United States to showing its capacity to intervene everywhere in the world and to demonstrating its power. Why United States failing in this role of peacemaker? Because of the Donald Trump administration, which making an American aura abroad on the international scene. The second reason is the refusal of the ambassador Armenia and Azerbaijan in Washington to meet the U.S. Secretary of State of United States of Foreign Affairs in trilateral. The presidential campaign at the end of 2020 and the assault on the Capitol by supporters of Donald Trump to definitively disengage the United States for this role of peacemaker and in order to refocus on internal issues. Russia has launched a call for peace in the first place so as to have conflict near in the southern border. The second reason why Russia calling for peace is the Turkey competition as a major regional player in this conflict. It's partly due to the support to it's given to Azerbaijan, and Russia seeing it's having lost its regional influence as calling for peace to regain the role as arbiter in this region. A will to act for support, but also to show Armenian which condemning the ex-Armenian president close to Vladimir Putin to take advantage of it, show it to Armenian without Russia. It cannot assure its defense alone. The last reason, there is communication in call for peace for Russia also passes through the link and the context of Soviet Union, which they are a facilitator to make the call for peace here. But it was also an opportunity to Russia to seek and succeed to implanting military presence in Azerbaijan, something that had not been since at the end of the Cold War. While Russia succeeded in opposing peace in Nagorno-Karabakh, the post-Soviet context was a facilitator. The role and the weight of the Russian and Armenian Orthodox Church and their influence in this political of both countries was the facilitator. One of the last reasons is the economic ties between the Russia and the two belligerent countries also imposed a domination relationship between the belligerent country and the Russian power in the north. So the call for peace for some nation often in interest greater than the arrest of protection of the local population. With France, United States and Russia, we have a wide range of reasons of diplomatic, economic and political interests within the framework on call to peace to this country in the time of war, which push the player role to communicate and to position themselves on the issue of the conflict.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury. Thank you for making this event possible, even though I'm not able to be with you to participate to the MARPE conference in the Higher Institute of Social and Political Science of the University of Lisbon. But I'm very happy to make you this short video today so that you get to know me better and understand better my paper. I want to begin the presentation by introducing myself. My name is Asma Bassoum, I'm 25 years old, and I'm a Tunisian student at Gustave Eiffel University in France, preparing a master's degree specialized in influence, lobbying, and social media. So I chose to talk about the power of compassionate communication in public diplomacy. I wanted to highlight the importance of such a powerful emotion, which is compassion, and how it's used by political leaders to influence their fellow citizens and wider foreign inhabitants. So I started my paper by giving a general definition of compassion, then defining precisely what is compassion in politics. So several definitions were chosen to figure on the paper. From these previous definitions, a personal one will be born soon. So I'm working on that right now in order to include it in the article. Then I tried to explain how political leaders master the art of showing compassion and empathy in time of crisis towards their fellow citizens and wider foreign inhabitants. So if we observe what is happening on the political landscape today, we will notice that the media are communicating more and more about compassion and community engagement, specifically when our lives have been turned upside down due to the disruptions of around COVID-19, but also racism and racial inequalities. There are several examples of political personalities that opted for the compassionate route and have been successful in their ability to communicate efficiently with their citizens during the current pandemic. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, is a good example to illustrate our point. Also, I've explained the art of rhetoric employed by political leaders in hard times. For that, I've chosen to illustrate it with the example of French President Macron, who showed us well his compassion towards Lebanon and Lebanese citizens after the unexpected explosions of the port of Beirut last July 2020. In fact, Macron was the first foreign president that attended the scene of the blast to meet with the affected Lebanese citizens. As a matter of fact, historically, France enjoys a friendly relation with Lebanon to the point of France being seen as a brotherly country or qualified as a tender mother and the second homeland of the Lebanese. What can be observed clearly is the acclamations on the streets of Beirut that the day Macron visited. So the French president listened, held hands, gently tapped shoulders, and hugged some of the Lebanese that greeted him as a sign of compassion and solidarity. He also gave a speech 2 days after the explosions to Lebanese citizens. He ended it with 3 words in the local Lebanese dialect. So it's very, very powerful. So this performance and the method employed of speaking in the same language as the local population in attendance of the West Berlin speech by the this performance is reminiscent of the West Berlin speech by the President of the United States, John Kennedy, which I chose to talk about in my third example in this paper. Kennedy's speech in 1963 was famous due to the expression that he uttered in German, "Ich bin ein Berliner," when he stepped in front of West Berlin inhabitants to show support to West German citizens, especially West Berliners, who lived on the borderline of communist neighborhood, namely East Germany, delimited by the Berlin Wall. After exposing in my paper the latest 3 examples, I gave some explanations of why political leaders
Internet. Vou carregar aqui.
show compassion and empathy toward their citizens and foreign citizens? Is it to weaponize compassion in the speeches in order to guarantee a global acceptance and a wide sphere of influence? So before ending the article, I asked a question about the reaction that can have foreign leaders and foreign inhabitants towards political leaders. Are such attitudes always welcome? Wouldn't it be treated with suspicion and precaution? My final objective was to answer a last question, which referred to the ability or not of political leaders to practice compassionate communication towards any foreign country's citizens. So we'll see that it's not that easy, and for that we took the example of Turkish President Erdogan and French President Macron. As for the limits, few studies have been devoted to study compassion as a political and societal tool. Most researchers cover it essentially in religion and psychological fields without giving attention to its importance and its implications in the political context. As for the methodology, my sources of data were scientific articles that treated the question of compassion, compassion and politics, nonviolent communication, etc. I also read books such as The Compassionate Republic by Mitchell Richard. I use also reports, newspapers to complete the research. I've analyzed also some talking points of the cited political leaders and tried to cross it with the books I read. And these are my references concerning the draft of the paper I've sent. Finally, I want to express my gratitude to the audience, and I want to thank the members of the jury for their attention. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, hi everyone. I am Sofiane Oubela. I graduated from Gustave Eiffel University on competitive intelligence. I am the author of a study entitled Chinese Media and the Belt and Road Initiative Facing the African Opinion on Twitter, the case of Kenya. I was able to present this research work at 2 international conferences in Paris and Morocco. I am very interested in issues of institutional influence, public diplomacy, environment, international relations, and more particularly in Europe-Africa relations. So in the framework of the MARPE Diplo Conference, my research work is entitled EU Green Diplomacy Onboarded in European Soft Power in Africa for the Better. So in view of the next summit with the African Union, the European Union has been working for several years on the development of a new partnership with the African continent, led by Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Urpilainen, and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission, Josep Borrell. The two continents have gradually integrated the environment and climate as pillars and as a priority to their cooperation, as it previously focused on trade, security, and migration issues. In this context, the European Union has deployed and structured an important environmental and climate diplomacy for its various partners, particularly in regards with Africa. So, this diplomacy is part of the desire by European political leaders to position the European Union as a leader in the ecological and energy transition at the international level, but also to get their partners, whether governments or civil society, to adhere to their vision and their ambitions to act in favor to act in favor of the environment and the climate. In this context, the EU has developed in parallel to this environmental diplomacy a public diplomacy whose main objective is to communicate the values and commitments of the Union in terms of the environment while multiplying interactions with the various components of civil society. For this study, I elaborate two research questions. The first one is the following one. So, is green diplomacy used as a soft power leverage to push forward environmental is the EU green diplomacy used as a soft power leverage to push forward environmental issues on African governments' political agendas? So three hypotheses have been formulated. The first one is yes, it is the strengthening of the relationship between European and African leaders during the last months with the Portuguese European presidency and through many European leaders' speeches show the EU inclination for the continent. The second one is yes, and the EU mobilizes resources to do so, thanks to the European External Action Service as the European Union's diplomatic service. It helps the EU's foreign affairs carry out the Union's common foreign and security policy. They launch sustainable initiatives in collaboration with the local African governments. The third one is yes, and the EU has a specific agenda in Africa in order to move forward environmental issues and enhance the relationship with the continent. The second research question is the following one. So, how do African leaders and the wider African public perceive European green diplomacy in Africa? So, two hypotheses have been formulated. So, the first one is they support the European policy on climate. The future agreement after the end of the Cotonou Agreement and the summit, the EU-AU summit between the two continents is a signal for better relationship. The second hypothesis is they don't support the European policy on climate, and the EU will no longer be a privileged partner for Africa, and their involvement in their sustainable transition is seen as an intense interference in the African policy. So for the methodology, I combine an empirical approach with two interviews and a theoretical approach with speeches analysis. The first interview was with the senior advisor to the High Representative of the African Union for the EU-AU partnership. The second interview was with the Deputy Head of Division and Economic and Global Issues on the European External Action Service, EES. EAS, sorry. In addition, I organized several verbatims and speeches of various European African leaders. I also viewed several webinars dealing with the issue of climate and environment between Europe and Africa. From this point of view, we consider that the European Union's green diplomacy inserted in the logic of soft power could reinforce and improve the dialogue and cooperation with Africa. The European Union has made Africa a privileged partner, particularly in the fight against climate change. Europe has engaged in climate and environmental diplomacy towards the African continent, with an important component dedicated to the involvement and commitment of African civil society. This diplomacy, led by European commissioners, European delegations, and EU ambassadors in Africa, is facing reluctance on the part of African states represented by the African Union. The cooperation framework sought by the Europeans seems to lack clarity among the various African institutional stakeholders. A supporter of climate negotiations based on the Paris agreements, the African Union remains resolutely opposed to the EU Green Deal, regularly put forward by the European Union. The effects on the European Union's public diplomacy on climate and environmental issues thus remain limited by geopolitical considerations. The competition between Europe and China raises a form of mistrust in Africa, which does not wish to be considered as an instrument of power and domination to the detriment of its development and the fight against climate change. To conclude, so despite the efforts made by the European Union towards public opinion and African civil society, the lack of clarity of its environmental policy towards the continent, coupled with the competition with China, does not allow Europe to benefit from the plenty support of and commitment of its African partner. The European Union's public diplomacy on the environment in Africa is therefore not very effective in the pursuit of climate objectives as long as governance is not definitely part of a multilateral perspective. Climate diplomacy cannot be envisaged solely according to a bottom-up approach characterized by the multiplication of interaction with civil stakeholders. The European Union's communication on climate change does not seem to convince African leaders who take a dim view on Brussels' desire to impose the Green Deal as the reference framework for cooperation. They consider that Europe is using Africa as an instrument to assert its power over China. Without the support of African leaders, it is therefore difficult to imagine that the European Union can assert its leadership and preserve its influence on the continent. The over-politicization of the climate and environmental issue finally marks a point of tension and discord to the detriment of achieving the objectives set by the Paris Agreement. It would be interesting to conduct a comparative study between European environmental diplomacy, which relies mainly on political dialogue with leaders and civil society, and Chinese climate diplomacy, which relies more on economic energy diplomacy through numerous investments.
Странно, не знаю. Я могу еще раз тебя кинуть, может, он быстрее.
So thank you for your time and have a great day. Thank you.
Hello, I am Lucile Desmoulins, Associate Professor in Information and Communication Sciences at the Gustave Eiffel University. My main research goal is to articulate organizational and strategic communications. I analyze political decision-making processes through cognitive approaches and critical discourse analysis. You can read here the title of the communication, but I would start by saying that another title would have been great. Rereading the interview's transcript, I was struck by what a leading think tanker specialized in the Mediterranean world told me. he made a joke about the mixed and complex perceptions the foreigners have of his status, leading him sometimes to even question himself about his own identity and feeling sometimes lost in translation when speaking to foreign diplomats, journalists, or columnists. He mentioned one example of a foreign diplomat who was also a key informant, who always repeatedly asks him, who is speaking? Who says so? Is it you speaking or someone else? This foreign diplomat means that he always wonders whether Mr. Daguzan's discourse, his opinion, reflect or not that ones of his government. He also means that he expects French leading think tankers' opinion should rather be closely aligned to French president and minister's official line, and if not, then they should say so, because no matter their academic ethos, they would be perceived as taking part in parallel diplomacy, soft power strategies, and public diplomacy. When this diplomat and Mr. Daguzan became more intimate, they acknowledged that they both spoke together on a no waffle basis, no beating around the bush basis, no langue de bois in French. This led them to ask each other the question, who is speaking, who says so, how are you seriously talking like this? This is now a kind of joke between them, but it shows that they negotiate the level of organicity of their mutual discourse. The theoretical framework of this paper is very classical, focusing on very classical concept in international relation theories. But we also relied on cultivation theories to be able to understand the role of mass media in the representation and the shaping of public's perception. Here is where our research questions come from. The wording risky parallel diplomacy initiatives is like a common formula in the press. Yet, think tanks are important vectors of national soft power and play a valuable role in international relations, according to Civic. So this paradox calls for more research. Then, major think tankers are often interviewed by foreign journalists, and since they interact a lot with foreign diplomats too, they are discreetly taking part in second-track diplomacy. Since foreign publics believe that they speak in the name of France, they are de facto taking part in French public diplomacy, hence this organic think tanker figure we mean to describe. The methodology of this article follows a long acquired insider knowledge. It includes more than 130 interviews with decision makers, journalists, and think tankers. They took place between 1998 and 2020, which ensures a long diachronic perspective. We did not access to official historical records for this research. To analyze the journalist perception on think tanker second-track and public diplomacy activities, we collected and analyzed more than 400 articles using monitor platforms. Now the results. First, we showed that think tanks are hybrid organizations housing experts at the confluence of politics, business, and academia. Think tanks have two main goals: influence the small circle of decision makers, as well as enlighten and shape public opinion. Think tankers would gain their visibility, legibility, and legitimacy from their media presence, but also if they are commissioned studies, reports, and papers by administration. This contractual expertise relationship with governments, as well as the homogeneity within the elites, as well as the revolving door system, have an impact on think tankers' complex identities. A prestigious member of the House of Lords, former director of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, John Roper, considered that each country should have its own institute. Think tankers should also be the government's spokespersons. Let's not forget that French think tanks on IR, security studies, and area studies have long been little autonomous from the state. The creation of several think tanks are widely described as a fait du prince rather than a civil society initiative. French leading decision makers, diplomats, and French military officers often meet by proxy certain foreign personalities. For instance, the opponents of allied regimes or deemed infeasible figures like terrorists, dictators, military officers willing to betray their country. And diplomats often meet each other in person on the neutral ground of a think tank office in that case. These conversations often take place thanks to the mediation of a leading think tanker. This happened a lot during the Cold War. I've heard a lot of old stories about that, and I believe this still happens. So this second-track diplomacy has an impact on the perception of think tankers being not so autonomous from their governments. So description of French think tankers' institutional affiliation in foreign press makes it clear that their identity is multifaceted and therefore unclear. They are seen as unofficial spokespersons of French government, able to voice as well explain their government's position. Our corpus also shows that they would sometimes even decisively promote French policies. And in some very rare cases, they don't. It's on very heavy topics like French dominance in Afrique and freedoms destroying laws after terrorist attacks. To sum up this article, our goal was to highlight the many roles played by French think tanks and think tankers and their relations to parallel and public diplomacies. Think tankers are sometimes expected to explain their government's public policies, no matter whether they are willing to fulfill or not this ventriloquist mission. This mission echoes the expectation of foreign journalists who find more convenient to call a think tanker than a diplomat because they are more available, talkative, and didactic. Hence, all French top think tankers specializing in international relations and security studies acknowledge that they will sometimes be considered as organic think tankers. They can speak as free as they want, but they should always explain in the name of who they speak. French think tankers specialized in IR security and area studies have been fulfilling latent para-diplomatic missions since the Cold War. They probably still are. They are indeed ideal intermediaries. They are diplomatic language literate and willing to show that they can be useful. We describe this crystallization of a think tanker figure we labeled organic think tanker. This figure is neither a status nor a unique identity, but rather a suit that most think tankers would fit in and accept to wear when required to do so by foreigners. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for all the authors of the video. It was a very interesting session. Now, as we are with short time for question and answers, I would rather prefer to ask the audience if there is any question, and please let us know to whom do you to whom do you want to put your questions to? Thank you so much. Is there any participant that would like to? Please, Zhao Wang, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Just a question for Lucile Desmoulins. Oh, you talk about think tank public diplomacy, and we all know think tanks have often multiple roles and multiple publics. If they are divided by audiences, they can include as well as domestic audiences and international audiences. So in your research, have you remarked, are there communication strategies for these different audiences are the same, or there are some different practice related to some, paradiplomatic communications?
To work on this paper, I only did a research on the foreign press. So to answer your question, I need to rely on my prior knowledge and not on the corpus I've been working on for this paper. And if I rely on my prior knowledge, then I would say that as far as the French context is concerned, when a journalist would go to a think tanker to get some explanation about an international issue, or to know, to get his opinion, then most of the time, there is such a small number of think tankers who are considered as go-to think tankers as far as the French scene is concerned. So when he goes to a given think tanker, he would already know what he would get. He would, for instance, if he goes to François Hesbaut on this topic, you know that François Hesbaut will say this and this and this, and he would know also that François Hesbaut is more related to this person in the government and this party. So as far as the French public sphere is concerned, I think that the game is different, because all journalists would know what they would get from French think tankers, whereas the game is more open when, as far as journalists in the US or in the UK or in Germany are concerned, because they would just go to a website and say, okay, these are the French think tanks. I want to find a French think tanker who knows something about the Mediterranean zone, and that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to know if there is any other questions for our participants, our speakers in this case, our video authors. No? I would like just to ask one question to Sofiane Oubela on the European Union green diplomacy. I would like to know if you think that this different approach, or this new approach from the European Union towards Africa, is really different from the NEPAD strategy, for example, or if you think that is the same, it's business as always. And also, I would like to have some insights, if you can, dealing with the Chinese competition in Africa. How do you think the European Union would be able to manage that competition and at the same time provide for the climate deal, the European Union Green Deal? Thank you so much.
Thank you. What a question. I will say so. Can you just repeat the first part of your question? You mean is
if you could tell us how do you see the differences between the new European Union strategy, which is sustained by the European so-called European Green Deal, vis-a-vis the NEPAD approach.
Of the UN.
Yes, if it is really different or it is business as usual with a different name. Sorry to be provocative.
No, so yeah, I just I will take some precaution, because like it's my first it's not a large research, because just did 2 interviews, so I haven't enough empirical materials to back up my position. I mean, so what could I say? Maybe yes, on some way, the public diplomacy of the EU on climate is very like original in some part, because they, as said the Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen, that that the EU want to engage more the youth and the women in this diplomacy specifically. So I think they, as I said, also my one of my interviewer, he worked on the EEAS, and he told me that the public diplomacy is seen as a very strategic lever to push forward the climate diplomacy on Africa. So I think I will say that it could be different from what we have seen from now when you talk about the new path, because it's very institutional and very seen as something like maybe big organization or leading humanitarian way when you talk about climate, when you talk about development, and on this kind of diplomacy, they put forward expertise and more knowledge diplomacy, I would say. So I think it's quite different from this kind type of diplomacy. And the second part is we will talk about is it good? Sorry for my English. I just try to answer as the best I can. So for the competition with China, the weakness of the EU is that they can't they have not invest enough in green infrastructure when we compare it to China, because China is leading a big climate and energy diplomacy through economical tool. I mean, so they invest a lot in green infrastructure, and the EU, the Union African advisor told me that the EU isn't enough engaged in investing in green infrastructure in Africa. So I think it is a way the European Union can improve to reinforce the dialogue and the cooperation with Africa.
Thank you very much.